Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy, this is Rich. So, Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle's security is provided by the Cook County Forest Preserve.
It's my favorite group of guys. Remember, if you want to kill somebody successfully and not get caught, drop a body in the forest preserve.
Yeah, no, I know you've always said that, and
since the beginning of time,
perhaps have done it. Who would know? Because you get away with it, as you said.
Of course, I didn't do that.
Just a couple of weeks ago, a little more than a week ago, there was an attempted carjacking of the car in which a 59-year-old Forest Preserve officer was sitting. He was off duty, providing. He was off duty, but part of the security perimeter around Preckwinkle's house in Hyde Park. And
it happened September 27th.
And they tried to keep it from the public.
Right. Well, Chicago cops were alerted because this guy that was sitting in his squad car, according to CWB, fired back and shot a 19-year-old. And they thought that they could cover that up. But a Chicago cop that was nearby who was protecting Barack Obama's mansion heard the shots, and he's the one who reported the shooting finally. Well,
also, incredibly, Hyde Park residents, apparently they heard the shots fired and they called 911, probably looking for a social worker. And when a social worker wasn't available, they settled for the cops. The Chicago Police Department is saying the case report is restricted. They're not authorized to look at it. Ultimately, this guy... And this is, of course, the perfect Chicago story. This guy who made the attempted carjacking, and by the way, it was on an SUV that had a police plate. This is how emboldened these criminals are, these predators on the streets of Chicago. He was involved in another incident, attempted break-in, and the police caught up with him, arrested him. He had an outstanding warrant for failing to appear in court on a pending felony charge of possessing a stolen motor vehicle. Oh, well, golly. I'm glad he learned his lesson and was bonded out. But the whole Tony Preckwinkle doesn't disclose where she lives. Tony Preckwinkle has the security houses. Detail. But this is where she votes, the one in Hyde Park. Right. She's a public official. It's public record. The whole attempt to paper over this is so emblematic of what you get from the city, which is literally Superintendent David Brown telling a group of business leaders the other day that carjackings are down.
That's a lie.
Well, no kidding. In point of fact, and this doesn't even include the woman who was carjacked on Michigan Avenue yesterday, Chicago police recorded 1,234 carjackings citywide through September 28th. That's up 38% year over year. For September, there were 168. That's up 57%. And it's from 107. It's 168 through last Wednesday, up 57% from the last year over year. It's 147% higher than the same month in 2019. 223% higher as compared to September of 18. And carjackings are down.
And 60% of those carjackers are teenagers, according to Superintendent Brown. In North Center, where it's near, Lakeview North Center, same thing, West Lakeview. In 2019 and 2020, we had a total of both years combined 4 shootings. Now we've already had 4 shootings in the past month. It is living in hell. These rolling shootouts. One happened Sunday night where Janelle Gardner was killed. Monday, a 16-year-old was shot. They were going 85 miles per hour down Irving Park and ended up at Irving Park in Ashland. In Lakeview, next to a playground, this is what it sounded like. Yeah, and so the 16-year-old who was killed in that incident, I talked to the medical examiner's office yesterday. Family still hasn't come to ID him, which is so sad. So maybe they don't know if he's missing, whatever. Was he living at home? Who was in charge of this child? And then The other night, last night, there was a rolling shootout, and it ended up a guy crashing into Illuminati's on Lincoln Avenue in Montrose. He was shot in the back of the neck. He's been taken into police custody, but his shooter's still on the loose. And it's crazy because now, Dan, they have cop cars positioned on Irving Park. The lights are on, the sirens are, but the cops are there on both sides of the street to let people know, we're trying to do something. I don't know. I'm at a loss.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately there's not enough police to provide the presence on every square block of Chicago that's required as the city's been turned over to these predators, as I said. And what do you get in response from your law enforcement and civilian political leaders? You get lies from David Brown, and you get Lightfoot and Kim Foxx doing the proverbial mutual combatants in terms of trying to ascribe blame to the other before blame is visited upon them. For more on all this, we're pleased to be joined by Tom Hogan, who served as a federal prosecutor, local prosecutor, and elected district attorney. He's currently in private practice. He wrote a piece for City Journal, the Manhattan Institute, about the Austin shootout last Friday, in which you have one person killed and 5 people on videotape, shot spotter, and shooting at each other and no charges. And this is the basis of Lightfoot taking up after Foxx and Foxx responding in kind to Lightfoot. Tom Hogan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan and Amy, pleasure to be here. And I would ask how you're doing, but I've been listening to the show, and it's pretty clear how you're doing there in Chicago, and it's not well.
Right, and the problem is we can't, there are many problems, but one of them is we can't seem to get the police and the mayor and the police and the district attorney and the state's attorney, Kim Foxx, and the mayor and the state's attorney on the same page. And I think you would, as a former district attorney, you would probably agree that turns out to be quite a problem.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. I mean, at this point, you've even got another set of war going on, which really is the line police officers are not aligned with their own superintendent.
Yeah.
So everybody's pointing fingers. Nobody's moving in the same direction. And what we've seen over the years, and it took us 20 years to get the cities under control and safe, is you really need a mayor, a police department, and a district attorney all moving in the same direction. When they all move in the same direction to keep the city safe, then you've actually got a chance. And, a raid on the other side of you is a bunch of criminals, so it's not easy. But if any part of that triumvirate of the mayor, the police, and the prosecutor are heading in the wrong direction, then you're going to end up with an unsafe city. And right now, Chicago has 3 of them heading in the wrong direction.
It's just disheartening and frightening. So can you explain this mutual combatants? Because it's not on the law book. So if 2 gangs are shooting at each other and somebody gets killed, they're considering it involuntary manslaughter?
So that's ridiculous. The way mutual combat works, and it is not on the books in Illinois, but the way mutual combat works traditionally is 2 guys get into a fight and you can't figure out who started the fight, then that's a mutual combat and you call it a day. And actually, I used to tell young prosecutors, 2 guys get into a fight in a bar and one of them wins, one of them loses, that's not a crime. However, if in the case of these gangs, one gang showed up and started shooting into the house,
mm-hmm.
They are all on the hook. The other gang can claim self-defense. That's not mutual combat. That is not, a boxing match where 2 sides showed up and agreed to the rules. A bell rang and they started fighting. This is one gang starting it with the other gang. So everyone in the first gang, because I heard a discussion in the media about, well, what are you going to charge them with? You really can't sort out who fired. They're all charged with conspiracy to commit attempted homicide and aggravated assault.
Exactly.
It's as simple as that. They are all picked up. They are all locked up. And you can sort all out who fired specifically which shot, but they're all arrested at that point.
Exactly. So first of all, there's no involuntary manslaughter charge. That's not what they're saying at all. They're saying mutual combatants and everybody walks because we can't get cooperation from the 2 that were injured that we had in custody or at least had spoken with. But that makes no sense. So, they're not going to cooperate against their fellow gangbangers they were shooting at. Yeah, no kidding. But you have them, and they were material participants in this shootout. And you just say, well, because we can't get witness corroboration on who started it, then everybody gets to go free. That's insane.
Well, and there are simple tools that experienced prosecutors know how to use, because we deal with gang crime all the time and witnesses that don't want to cooperate. One, you can immunize gang number two, who were responding to the fire and firing back, and force them to testify or to get locked up. And so that's not that difficult. The other thing you can do is you can start flipping people. When they start looking at 20, 30, 40-year sentences, that's when people start to crack, and that's when they will come in and they'll tell you what happened. In addition, in this case, a lot of this is caught on video. It's not that hard to pick the guys out and say, yeah, that's him, that's him, that's him, and just to charge them with a conspiracy, and then they're locked up and they're off the street.
So what can police do when prosecutors won't prosecute?
Well, that is what I recently wrote about, because that is the big problem. When prosecutors won't prosecute, and we call it deprosecution, which is they've decided there are certain parts of the criminal code they're just not going to prosecute. The Chicago police are really getting creative. They tried in the Serenity Broughton case to actually use an override procedure to file murder charges without the prosecutor's approval. And Kim Foxx immediately called the superintendent and made him pull the charges. But that was one way around it. That at least put public pressure on Foxx, that the police were saying, we've got somebody, we've got a suspect, and if you don't want to arrest, then you say it. You take the blame for it. The other thing they did in the Jussie Smollett case was they found a judge who was as outraged as everyone else about the dismissal of the charges after the fake hate crime hoax. And they got the judge to appoint a special prosecutor and decided they would go with a different prosecutor. Now, both of those are relatively rare actions. The real answer here, and I've seen this done before when I was a federal prosecutor, is the U.S. Attorney's Office should wade into this. It's time to start indicting large swaths of these gangs and putting them under the hammer with federal firearms charges, with conspiracy and RICO charges, with drug trafficking charges. And let me tell you, I'll tell you exactly what a criminal once told me. He said, local charges, those are like an NFL game. I might be looking at 7-14. All right, I can do that.
Okay.
But once you get into the feds, you're starting to look at numbers that look like an NBA game. You're starting to look at 110-93. And at that point, I'm not doing that amount of time. I'm going to tell you what's going on out here, and I'm getting myself back out onto the street within 20 years.
Yeah, but that has...
So the U.S. Attorney's Office has to wade in.
Yeah, but that's fraught with problems too, because you have to put this in context, and the context is you've got cities seeing huge spikes in violent crime across the country, and then you're talking about federal resources. You're also in the Chicago context talking about still cooperation with the locals. And when Barr came in to a handful of cities, including Chicago, at the end of the Trump term with Operation Legend, Lori Lightfoot was sort of like shoulder shrugging about it. Yeah, fine. If he wants to do something to help out, then fine, whatever. But there wasn't exactly alacrity in her voice or disposition with the added resources to try to get gangbangers off the streets, as you're describing. It seems to me that the real answer is there is no way to affect safer streets if you do not have prosecutors who will prosecute repeat violent offenders and mayors and police chiefs who will demand as such. And that's what we don't have.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as long as they're going to stand in the way, it's going to be very difficult to reestablish control of the city. And, the answer for the police at that point is started to be what you're seeing all across the nation, which is the police are either depolicing. And if you look in Austin, Texas, Austin PD actually put out a memo to the public saying, if it's a non-emergency call, don't call us. They defunded us. They're deprosecuting us. So unless it's a robbery in progress or a murder, don't call us. because we're not going to be able to respond. And the other option for the police is quit. And you're seeing that more and more across the nation. Mm-hmm. They're walking away from the job. And, I've heard multiple generation police families telling their kids, you're not going into the police department. Our connection to the police ends here.
I'll tell you what, we've seen that sort of, you're right, that's exactly what we're seeing happening in Chicago, as you're saying, is happening around the country. What we haven't seen, and maybe this is the next step, is career prosecutors of good conscience, serious officers of the court, unlike the politicians. They do the same thing that some of the police are doing, which is take a walk and take one publicly and describe to the public what exactly is or is not happening in offices like the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to bring that sort of public pressure.
And that actually has been happening. I wrote about that as well in a piece called "The Prosecutorial Brain Drain." In St. Louis, which has another very progressive prosecutor who is de-prosecuting, they have had over 100% turnover in the office as the experienced prosecutors simply voted with their feet and walked out. Now, something very interesting is happening in L.A., where George Gascon came in and is trying to de-prosecute, which is the prosecutors out there are unionized, and they are fighting back tooth and nail, the line prosecutors. They actually sued Gascon and said, you can't force us to stop prosecuting, to stop bringing certain enhancements. It's in the law, and we're going to do it. And they won. And the judge said, yeah, Gascon, you're not allowed to do that. So people are trying to get creative.
Yeah. All we need is another public sector union in Chicago. But, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Tom Hogan.
Far be it from me to root for a public sector union.
Yeah, I hear you, but I hear you. I get it.